Now, Phil Mudd, he's a former CIA analyst and is a CNN counterterrorism analyst, and retired Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, who served for the LA Police Department. Phil, let me start with you. I want to run through what we know of the day. 11:28, the gunman crashes his car. 11:40 a.m., the gunman gets into the school. 11:44 a.m., law enforcement, quote, make entry. They go into the school too. Now, after that, there's more than an hour gap where officers say they were calling for backup, they were evacuating other kids. At 1:06 p.m., the attack is reported to be over. So 90 minutes from the start of the attack until the shooter is dead. And it doesn't seem as though they breached the classroom where the shooter was with these kids until the very end. Does this sound normal to you?
It sounds like a long period of time. Look, one of the questions I'd have is whether the reports of people who went in there, the SWAT team members, are consistent. One of the reasons we might not be getting good answers on why it took so long is classic. That is, there will be inconsistencies among unreliable witnesses. But the side-by-side question, Jake, that we haven't talked about is you've got that time frame, that time gap. I want to know what the training was for responding to active shooter and whether the actions of the individuals who went in did what they were required to do under training, or else whether that gap was a result of them not applying their training. So there's the gap, and whether that gap corresponds to what they've been told to do in training exercises. Jake, we just don't know the answer to that yet.
And Sergeant, correct me if I'm wrong, but after Columbine, police protocol changed. It used to be the tradition that if there was an active shooter, police would wait it out, try to negotiate, et cetera. But after Columbine, the guidance changed and police were supposed to just go in and stop the shooter. That does not appear to be what happened here. Tell me if I'm wrong here.
Well, listen, I think part of the problem is that we assume when we talk about police departments that we're talking about large agencies, and we understand now that training is not uniform, it's not standardized, and I've heard reports that this is a very small department in Uvalde. I think 6 officers, and that includes the police chief and a couple of detectives, and so Lord only knows what kind of training they may have had. And so note to self, police departments going forward, while you may not have had a murder in your town or you may have never dealt with an active shooter, you absolutely need to be proactive in your training and make sure that your officers know how to respond. It sounds like they were relying on the response and assistance of nearby agencies to do this very delicate tactical work that required as a result of this shooting.
Phil, what questions do you still have about this investigation? Obviously, the shooting was just 2 days ago. What more are you wondering about that we haven't found out in terms of the actual shooter?
Boy, there's a lot that people aren't talking about that occurs to me after all the cases I watched. Think of a human being, an individual in the middle of a spider web. That spider web is what we used to call in the business a pattern of life. That pattern of life in this case includes where there's signs to the family. I've heard very little about what the family has said to investigators and what they think. We've heard more about friends. Let me give you another one. What his search patterns were on the internet and whether those search patterns changed over time. We don't know that. Let me give you a big one that's unanswered. This individual on his 18th birthday, this individual who evidently was not doing well in school and dropped out of a Wendy's, had enough money to buy 2 weapons and to buy a whole boatload of ammunition. Who gave him the money? What was the intent behind providing that money? And did that person or persons know anything about what he was going to do with that money? Boy, there's a lot of stuff building pattern of life, that web of life around the shooter that we don't know yet, Jake.
Sergeant, the gunman had no prior criminal history, no known mental health history. He just turned 18. He legally bought his 2 AR-15 style rifles. His grandfather said he didn't know that he had guns. Would a red flag law, would a stricter background check have stopped this?
Well, if that information was known, and while the grandfather may not have known, I would imagine the grandmother who got shot in the face by this individual knows that he has some issues with anger management. Where are the parents in all of this? And while there is no record of criminality and no reports of mental illness, I don't think that's a factor. I can imagine that there are certainly plenty of instances of him being incorrigible, him not having any respect for authority. He dropped out of school. And so somewhere there needs to be a list now made of folks like that who don't rise to the level of criminality or insanity, but certainly would give background investigators pause before they just give them 2 ARs and a boatload of ammunition to go out to the public.
Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, Phil Mudd, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.